with us?
Yes, sir.
Well, we want to welcome him and invite him to take the witness stand.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. It's Dr. Westmaas.
Yes, as they say in Barbados, put a handle on his name. Yes,
Dr. Nigel Westmaas, do you swear that the evidence that you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I
So
do.
help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
well, you may stand, you may sit, you may do half of sitting and half of standing at your convenience, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Westmaas, could you state your entire name for the record?
Nigel David Westmaas.
Could you please indicate where you're currently employed
Hamilton College, New York, United States.
and what are you employed there as?
Professor in Africana Studies. Africana Studies. Africana.
Before we proceed into your evidence, could you tell us what are your qualifications at this time?
Well, I'm an activist, a former activist of the Working People's Alliance, and current activist as well. And I have a PhD in historical sociology, a bachelor's degree in history, and a master's degree in sociology.
Dr. Westmaas, did you join the WPA at some point in time in the 1970s?
Yes, I joined the WP approximately some period in 1978.
1978.
Yeah.
And what position did you hold in the WPA when you joined that political party?
Ordinary member.
Professor Westmaas, how old are you then?
Approximately 20.
20?
Yeah.
Thank you.
As an ordinary member in 1978 of the WPA, did you have any interactions with Dr. Rodney?
Yes, I did.
At this time, could you please indicate whether you submitted a statement to the Commission of Inquiry
Yes, I did.
and you signed that statement?
Yes, I did.
And attached to your statement, there are 5 appendices.
Yes, they are.
If you were to see your statement again with the appendices attached, how would you be able to identify it?
By my signature and the content therein.
Do you have a copy of
Yes,
it
I
with
do.
you? Respectful application for the witness to look at the statement he submitted to the Commission.
Yes, please proceed.
Yes.
Is that the statement which
Yes.
you submitted
Yes.
along with the 5 appendices? And you see your signature.
Yes.
Respectful application to have the written statement of Dr. Nigel Westmaas submitted to the Commission to be tendered and marked as an exhibit, suggested NW1 as the tag.
Can I just see, please, before it's admitted in evidence?
Grateful, ma'am. We have copies.
the statement is being looked at, what was your PhD in? What was the thesis subject?
The thesis subject was the newspaper press of British Guyana.
The,
The newspaper press of British Guyana.
okay, thanks. Did it, over a particular period or?
Yes, from 1796 to 1900.
What was the largest number of dailies you had at any one time?
Pardon?
The largest number of dailies, daily newspapers?
It varied from time to time, but in the 19th century, it was probably the highest number, 5 approximately.
A day?
Yes.
Yes, it's good.
Yeah.
Yes, so you're here.
Now, Mr. Westmaas, between the period 1978 and 1980, could you indicate what positions you would have held within the WPA?
Well, I joined as an ordinary party member, distributing leaflets, engaging the public in public demonstrations, picketing. Subsequently, after the assassination of Walter Rodney, I was asked to act as center coordinator of the WPA headquarters in Tiger Bay.
That is what kind of coordinator?
Center coordinator. We call it the WPA Center. So I was in charge of the desk. In other words, receiving members of the public, distributing day clean to activists, and responsible for some accounting, and also membership forms which people came in at that time in regular numbers to acquire.
At one point in time, I believe Mr. Ogunse referred to you in his evidence as the archivist of the WPA. Is that true, Mr. Westmaas?
Only in the sense that it's an organic title, it's not an official title. I was always interested in publications. To use an analogy, the older you get, the more interested I become. So essentially I collect material, newspapers, old newspapers, and so when I joined the WPA, the natural recourse was to collect and maintain a repository of documents therein.
In your written statement, Mr. Westmaas, you referred to some personal encounters you had between 1978 and 1980. You recall that?
Yes.
In fact, you traversed 3 specific encounters
Yes.
in that statement.
Yes.
At this time, I would wish for you to explain and give us some details in relation to the first encounter you had at a public meeting in Carmerville in August of 1979.
Well, that was a public meeting organized by the WPA in Vreden Hoop on the west bank, west coast of Demerara. A number of activists went up to that area because we are from Tiger Bay, so we went with a procession of activists, including myself. I can't recall how I actually went there. I don't think I went in the same vehicle with Dr. Rupnarayan, but I was among the activists who were preparing the meeting to begin. And at that point in time, Brother U.C. Guyana was the chairman. Brother Takuma Gunse, who was here, gave testimony here, was also present. Dr. Walter Rodney was present. Dr. Rupert Rupnarayan, and a number of activists who I can't remember at this time. At some point in the proceedings, before the meeting started, there was a hustle and bustle of people who were not connected to the supporters or the membership of the party, who were attempting to dislodge equipment. I was standing approximately 100 feet away from the rostrum and from which Brother U.C. Guyana would have chaired the meeting. Brother Rupnarayan and Dr. Rodney were scheduled to speak as well. And at some point, I saw Brother Ogunse engaging in combat or physical protection of the equipment because some thugs, what we call thugs, were attacking the party equipment and pulling it down. At some point, I can't recall clearly, a set of members ran across our vehicle, and I was standing near Dr. Rupnarayan. There was a green hold in, and they asked us to put it inside quickly. because we want to protect our equipment. The activists did so, including myself, and then we noticed, because of that, the attention brought to that vehicle from the other thugs, we noticed a Land Rover being packed with people, and some of them were coming across the road to attack the vehicle. Thereupon, Dr. Rupnarine said, let's get out of here with the equipment. So I jumped in the passenger seat. I couldn't drive at that time. And Dr. Rupnarine and I drove away from the proceedings.
Dr. Westmaas, I'd stop you at this point in time. These individuals who you said were not party supporters or members of the party, were you able to identify who they were?
Not at that time. There were essentially people, I learned later, were people recruited by the Office of the Regional Development Office, that time headed by Joshua Trowett Mutu, a Minister of Regional Development, I think it was. One name came to mind afterwards, somebody named Lespar, who was the chief organizer of the thuggery, so to speak. But other than that, I can't recall.
I'm so sorry to have to interrupt because I missed that. You later learned that they were recruited by.
Could you repeat the name, who they were recruited by?
The Ministry of Regional Development, that time headed by Joshua Trowett Mutu. We later learned that the thugs that were present at that meeting were recruited by that Regional Development Ministry.
Now, you spoke about a van load of individuals coming towards the vehicle that both yourself and Mr. Rupnarine were in.
Yeah.
Were you able to identify the people in that vehicle? Were they wearing any specific type of clothing?
No. There were civilians in a vehicle, a Land Rover.
And what, if anything, happened after Mr. Rupnarine said to you, let's get out of here?
Well, we drove south, going towards the Demerara Harbor Bridge with the intention of taking the equipment back to the party headquarters and thereby protecting it. But of all the days, the vehicle began to sputter and developed some kind of heating problem. And so it was jerking and not moving at any specific required pace to escape the Land Rover. And the Land Rover was gaining on us, and we were realizing that. By the time we reached the Demerara Harbor Bridge, which was built and completed by 1978, they were in hot pursuit of us. We noticed axe handles and cutlasses out of the side of the doors of the Land Rover. I was looking back periodically to see progress we were making or not making. And we noticed even, I think, you could see weaponry in the vehicle, but it was packed with individuals. So we tried to go across the Demerara Harbor Bridge, and we were cut off. At that time, there was a open sand area, and the Land Rover drove approximately, tried to cut us off from getting access to the bridge. So we turned back onto the main West Bank Road and drove further south towards the place which I'm about to refer to, La Grange. When we turned back onto the main road, their vehicle also pursued us. And so they were gaining ground steadily. And at that point, either myself or Dr. Rupnarine suggested that we turn into this village, which we didn't know at that time was La Grange, because there was a posting, I think that a structure, a crossbar structure, which is supposed to protect vehicles, bigger vehicles from going down small roads. And we thought that the size of that post would protect us from the Land Rover. In other words, the Land Rover might not be able to access the road, and we proceed down that road. So we turned into the road, the access road to La Grange, and drove. It was a very bumpy road, and we were looking back, expecting them to stop. They didn't stop, and their vehicle managed to get through, make access through. And so we knew now we were in a life and death situation. So we drove another 200 yards. At that point, we reached settlements on both sides of the road, in other words, houses. It was a cane field area. And with approximately 100, about maybe 75 to 100 yards separating us, we decided to make a quick move. And so we both ran out to the vehicle, threw open the door. I ran one way and he ran the other. I didn't know where he went until later. I ran into a yard. It was a kind of a pastoral setting. I remember owner of the yard was sitting in a hammock and there were chickens around. I ran, probably jumped over the hammock. I can't remember. I was in total flight and terror at that time. I ran into the yard, over the fence of the backyard, into what is called a pond trench, up to my waist or up to my chest approximately, into the cane field, and then I proceeded to run as far as I can into the cane field, which was, at that time I can't recall, it would be maybe 2 miles, I guess. I ran to the point where I considered nobody could find me. I then subsequently settled, ate some cane, sugar cane. I broke the stem and proceeded to eat some cane to, because I knew I was in for a long haul. And when night came, I dug a small hole in the cane thing and pulled the canopy back and stayed there for most of the night until the early morning, when I decided that this was the time to move. I was thirsty. I drank a bit of the creek water, but it was not, it was not safe. Mosquitoes were killing me. And so I proceeded back onto the main road, walked down to Demerara Harbor Bridge, walked over the bridge by dawn, caught a taxi over on the East Bank Road, and then went back to I called my parents, went back to the WP office, called my parents, and told them I was safe. Walter Rodney subsequently came in with a very concerned look in his face, and a relieved look, I should say, and asked me where Rupert was. And so then I proceeded to tell him that Rupert was probably somewhere there, and so they went back over to look for him.
Now, Dr. Westmaas, could you explain to us why it was that you decided to run away from these people who were in this Land Rover? Why was there a need to run?
Well, the need to run was obviously the meeting was being broken up at at Breeden Hoop. The intent of the people, it was very clear that they were intended to break up not only equipment but bodies as well. Our brother Takuma Agunse, who is a karate expert, engaged them at the Lagrange area, but we were in a vehicle, we were unarmed, and we saw hanging out of that vehicle very serious implements, and we decided that it's a life and death situation. We couldn't just stand up at the car and said, hi.
What sort of serious implements did you see?
As I indicated before, because the vehicle was packed with individuals, some of the individuals had axe handles and cutlasses in their hand. So it was sticking out of the window. I vaguely remember seeing a weapon as well, because I was the person looking back all the time to check on the progress. Rupert Ryan was busy trying to drive the vehicle to safety. And so in that consideration, we thought it was definitely a serious situation. So there was no option other than running.
I'm not sure what the witness means when he said he saw a weapon. Could you
Yes.
clarify that for me?
Yes, madam. When you say you saw a sort of weapon, what kind of weapon did you see?
I said a cutlass, which is an implement used in the Guyanese environment to weed and to cut cane. I saw an axe handle or an axe sticking out of the wood. I saw batons or implements of such sort, because it's about 9 or 10 individuals in the vehicle, so they were sitting on top of each other practically to try to catch us. So they were coming with their own safety in mind, I guess.
Thank you. And the witness did say when this incident took place?
Yes, Dr. Westmaas, when did this incident take
I
place?
think in the statement says September the 4th, 1979.
Thank you.
This is Lagrange.
Lagrange, yeah.
Lagrange, yes.
Now, Dr. Westmaas,
You started with the second incident and ignored the first.
Mr. Chairman, I did ask about the first incident and the witness went to the second.
That's why I answered it.
Yes,
Oh, yes.
Control it, control it.
yes.
All right, control it there.
Yes, You can look at your witness statement
Yeah.
to guide you, but as you have gone into the second incident, which you started to discuss on page 4 of your statement,
Okay.
I would wish to complete this particular incident.
Yes.
What, if anything, did you learn about Mr. Rupnarine after you returned to the WPA office?
Well, as I said, a set of activists went over with more protection to check for him. I can't recall if they found him that particular day, but the next day after he was found, we went back across to check on the status of the vehicle. And the vehicle was burnt and thrown into the trench. Material was scattered around the place. It was shoved downwards into the trench, and there was a sense of just completely, burnt, and the decision was made to burn the vehicle, in other words, and to destroy the equipment therein. I learned a wallet was stolen from it as well as some of the party equipment was gone.
Whose passport was stolen?
I have no idea. It was mentioned in the Catholic Standard of that period.
And whose vehicle was this?
The vehicle was owned by Dr. Rupnarine, Green Holden.
Dr. Westmaas, and I would refer you to page 3 of your statement. The first incident you spoke about that you personally encountered was a public meeting in Carmerville, and this is August of 1979.
Yes.
Do you care to tell us the details of that personal encounter?
Again, this was another meeting in a ward of the city called Camberville, where the WPA, as part of the Civil Rebellion, was trying to organize a public meeting. I do not think at that time that Dr. Walter Rodney was scheduled to speak, but because of his power of his presence, people assumed he would speak, and there was a massive turnout. I do not think permission was granted for the use of public address equipment for that meeting, so the police were there in full numbers to prevent it from starting. So when people were assembling, I can't recall the details, it's quite a while, but I do know that at some point the police charged at persons gathered at that point, and they were scattering in many directions. Groups of people were running in clumps, playing a game of cat and mouse with the police, stopping when they attacked and running when they... I was with a group with Dr. Rodney, and he was running with us, and it was a kind of it was serious, but it was also a bit of parody going on in the group because we were laughing at the police efforts to catch us. And the group with Dr. Rodney decided at one point we would be caught, and we decided to go down the back of a house in Camberville on the railway line, I think it was, and we ran behind the house and sat and waited the police to depart. And at that point, Dr. Rodney was engaging the 15 of us or so. Again, the details are sketchy, about the situation. I think we played cards. He was a great card player. He took out, he played what is called trip trawl, that's the name of it. Yeah, and we also started to discuss the political situation. And at one point, he even ventured into some history while we were sitting on a thing called a septic tank, which is a receptacle for refuse, human refuse. And we sat on that while we were waiting for the police to disperse. Moses Bagwan, a WPA attorney and also a founding member, he was also in the groups running away, and he was caught, and he was beaten and his hand was broken by the police. So it was a very serious situation, but our group managed to escape unscathed, and Dr. Rodney was in that specific group.
So how many persons were in the group with yourself and Dr. Rodney?
As I said, about approximately 15.
Approximately 15.
Yeah.
Could you recall any other names other than yourself and Dr. Rodney at this time?
There may have been an activist called Mabutu Kamara and Bisu and Raj Kumar. Adeshina might be, I'm not sure, but there are some names that come to mind, but I can't be clear.
At this time. In your written statement, Dr. Westmaas, in relation to this same incident that occurred in Carmerville and the running away of your group, including Dr. Rodney, you said that the later the Prime Minister, Mr. Forbes Burnham, spoke of it at a Congress rally.
Yes.
You recall making reference to that?
Yes.
In what context was it spoken about?
Well, it was spoken in the context that we were running, and Dr. Rodney was in sneakers at the time, and they probably noticed that, but he was running with us and he had sneakers on, and as I said, we were chatting and joking, and so the police obviously, or some segments of the intelligence, probably saw Dr. Rodney with sneakers, so it was reported back to the officials, and Prime Minister Burnham made fun of it at the Congress. He said that Rodney should be sent to the Olympics because he's a great runner, and he has running skills, stuff like that.
You quoted a piece from the Biennial Congress on page 4 of your statement.
Yes.
And this is the first paragraph. Do you care to read that paragraph for us at this time?
Yes. Comrades, if you see Rodney run, if you see this big revolutionary run, comrades, I'm going to send him to Moscow to take part in the 100 meters. If you see that boy, but comrades, it is not only the 100 meters that he has got to take part in, because when the decathlon has finished running, he jumped over Palin, a big revolutionary, and he cleared it. Anyhow, comrades, let him have no fear. We don't want him for such petty offenses. No petty offenses. After all, he's a leader, albeit of the worst possible alternative. But comrades, we had our laughs. Let us be serious for a moment. What is this all about? End of quote.
Those words you quoted from the PNC Third Biennial Congress,
Yes.
pages 336 to 337.
Yes.
Now, whose words are those?
The words of Prime Minister Forbes Burnham, as quoted in the report of the PNC Biennial Congress.
At the point in time you were running away,
Yes.
were you feeling any fears?
Not the same fear I felt in the second incident, which I did mistakenly first. Because in this group we were much more secure. The police had batons, they didn't have guns. They were attacking, but we were well ahead of them, and we were stopping when they stopped and ran when we ran. So it was much more fun. When I say fun, I mean it in context of seriousness, but we were joking about their access to us.
Before the witness continues, he read directly from what he said was a report of the PNC Third Biennial Congress.
Yeah.
But on the earlier page, page 3, you had also said that the then Prime Minister or President had made another comment. What is the source of that other comment? You have given us the source and authenticity of the Olympics comments, but you have not given us the source so that we can make an assessment of the other words that you have attributed to the Prime Minister.
Pardon me, Madam Commissioner.
At the bottom of page 3 of your statement.
Yes. That statement is the same statement as indicated on page 4.
But you did say on page 3 that the then Prime Minister said WPA personnel should make their wills.
Oh.
But it does not form a part of the
Yes,
quotation.
yes, you're right,
So what
yeah.
is the source of that?
Yes, I don't have the exact source. I have access to when that was said. It's probably in the same speech, but I didn't quote it directly. Yeah.
Because we did come across that before.
Yeah.
And it was the same speech at the
Yeah.
Biennial Congress.
It's at the conclusion of the speech or something like that, so it was continuous, but it was my error.
As a young WPA member at the time, Dr. Westmaas,
Yeah.
as a young WPA member at the time, when did you first hear in this speech that the then Prime Minister had said WPA personnel should make their wills?
Well, it became a matter of a concern, or party members began to discuss it at the executive. I wasn't on the executive at the time, but it became a matter of concern that a public statement would be made like that in the public domain. And so there was discussion. I think Day Clean referred to it, the party newspaper Day Clean, referred to it, and there was discussion, but other than that, I think the WPA took it as a matter of the facts of the struggle at the time.
I'm sorry to be pressing this, because that evidence did come forward before, but your direct quotation from the presentation has been helpful. So if it is that there really is a direct quotation of the then Prime Minister saying this, it would be helpful if you produced it.
Okay.
You know, sources are always important to give veracity.
Dr. Westmaas, at the point in time when the police came and were attempting to disrupt the meeting, why did you run? Why didn't you stay there?
Well, obviously, we knew, we could see from the distance that people were being hit with batons, and that the crowd was definitely dispersing. The intent was to disperse the meeting. And we realized that if you stayed around, you'd be hit with a baton. And this was confirmed by the fact that Brother Moses Bagwan, hand was broken. He ran into a yard similar to our experience, except that he was caught. He ran into the wrong yard, and he was caught in the thing. I think probably tried to hide in a chicken pen or a coop, and they pulled him out and broke his hand with lashes. But Bagwan is a very tough individual. He didn't show any signs of, you know, I didn't see it myself, but I heard later that he was very stoic in terms of that attack. So we knew that if you stayed, you would be hit with a baton, at least stung or whatever.
So in running, you were trying to avoid being beaten?
Yeah.
Now, Dr. Westmaas, I have with me the report on the 3rd Biennial Congress of the People's National Congress, August 22nd to 26th of 1979. This has already been tendered into evidence and is marked EK3. Could you just have a look at the second to last paragraph on this page, number 343, and just indicate if that is where you got the quote in relation to make their wills? Could you read the paragraph, the second paragraph on the page, which is the second to last paragraph?
I have given warning in accordance with the mood, as I interpret it, of the 3rd Biennial Congress, which came to an end this afternoon. I repeat that the People's National Congress stands for peace, not conflict. The People's National Congress will never start violence. The People's National Congress did not ask for a confrontation. But comrades, as I said on Thursday, the battle is joined, no holes are barred. Comrades, they had better make their wills, because so far as we are concerned, we are not asking them for quarter, and we will not give them any. Comrades, we are now in the Roman amphitheater. The lion and the gladiator cannot both survive. One must die, and we know that the People's National Congress will live.
That is where you got the quote from?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Dr. Westmaas, in relation to your personal encounters, you went on to speak about a third incident in your statement at page 7.
Yes.
I believe it starts on page 6 and it concludes on page 7.
Yes.
That is a trip to Linden with Walter Rodney.
Yes.
Could you give us some details of this third personal encounter?
Yes. Well, again, time has passed and my memory is fading, but I do remember distinctly because of the circumstances in which I was called at a moment's notice to accompany a vehicle. I did not know at the time what was the operation about. But I was asked,
when did you receive this call? When?
I can't recall the distance. I just called it my home. I was either at the WPA office, as I usually am, or I was at home, and one of the activists called me to ask me if I could do something. I went, I arrived.
What year did this occur?
This occurred at approximately early 1980.
Early 1980.
Yes, I can't recall the exact date. And I subsequently went to, I think it was See Glimpse, which is a part of Sobrinesville, home of a WPA activist, female activist, Bonita Harris. And Bonita Harris's mother's car was in the yard, and a woman who I know her name, but I don't have permission to call her name. I was asked to sit in the front seat. And we drove and we picked up Dr. Walter Rodney at some point. At that point, I didn't know it was Dr. Rodney. Somebody slipped in the back of the car. And when we proceeded onwards, I was told we were going to Linden. But when we proceeded onwards, then suddenly Walter said, you know, it's me, because he was disguised as a carpenter. He had a saw, he had paint on his clothes, and he was wearing a, what do you call a taupe or something like that, which looked like, you know, he was a street person. My indication afterwards, or my surmise of the incident was that Dr. Rodney was, and the psychology of the seating arrangement, I was supposed to act as the son of the woman. She was what you could call in that time a classical petit bourgeois female in that time, and I was supposed to act as the son sitting in the front. So we were going up to Linden to fix her house. In other words, I didn't know, you know, I just was going, but I was going there to fix her house, and Rodney was the carpenter who was going along with her to assist that process. So we drove, and of course, Rodney is a very engaging person. We were chatting all the way, and when we arrived at the toll station, which is also a security checkpoint at that time, Walter reverted to sleeping, and with his saw and hammer and whatever in the seat, in the back seat, while we went through as mother and son. And I think what the psychology of it was that, you know, the people peering into the vehicle would see a situation where, you know, it's a normal relationship with somebody going to fix a house and they have a carpenter taken along. And it worked. We passed through there successfully. When we arrived in Linden, she went to her friends, and myself and Rodney went to meet with the WP activists at Linden. They appeared suddenly out of the dark by pre-arrangement, and we went into the house and we began to discuss the political situation. We returned later that night by the same route and with the same conveyance.
Dr. Westmaas, what exactly was discussed at that particular meeting that you were present at?
The general situation, the condition of bauxite workers at that time, the need to, I can remember him stating, I don't remember much of the meeting. I do remember that it was, you know, some key activists at that time at Linden, including Cedric Smith. But there was discussion about the conditions of working class at Linden, and he mentioned at that time, I think it was very serious repression, and I think he was telling the bauxite workers to steel themselves, that, you know, things will change, we have to overcome this period, it's a tough period. And so it's a kind of a calming exhortation about pacing the social revolt. And then it ended, and then we came back the same route.
Dr. Westmaas, why was there a need for such an elaborate disguise just to get Dr. Rodney to Linden?
Because he was Dr. Rodney. And at that time, he was very visible, as you saw in the recognition handbook and in the public domain. People recognize him on the streets and so on. That if he went to Linden, which was traditionally a stronghold of the People's National Congress, that it would be seen as very, very dangerous situation. So I think the idea was to go there undercover so as not to receive the wrath of the state at that time.
You said a dangerous situation, and you used the terminology, the wrath of the
state machinery,
at the time.
yes.
Now, why is it that you're using these words and those phrases?
Well, because this was the period of the Civil Rebellion. The previous incident I recall, I made mention of, the two incidents, were all part of the daily life of WP activists facing the brunt of state repression. There's a combination of incidents that when you accumulate them, in broad outline, it can include, physical violence as well as tax on your newspaper and other hindrances, including travel. So in that environment, I think Dr. Rodney wanted to make it clear that, it's a period which will pass, but we have to steel ourselves through that period to recover. Because, when you're faced with a situation when people don't see the activist level at a high point, some people might despair and, feel that there's no hope. So he was kind of reinstilling hope that even though it's a very tough period, that we will come out of it in that storm. So that was the context.
Up until this operation of transporting Dr. Rodney in disguise to Linden, what sort of wrath of the state had you personally experienced?
Well, I didn't, I was an ordinary activist, so I would experience the same restrictions of movement and, of course, physical danger as other activists. None of us were privileged in the comparison of repression, and it depends on where you are and which point you were at. If you were at a public meeting, you happened to be, there were meetings broken up, for example. Day Clean, I was a very prolific seller of Day Clean in party newspaper, so I would sell it in many regions, Georgetown, as well as rural areas, and sometimes you would face threats of thuggery, not all the time, but you would face it. So there was a general environment of fear, and so I was no special person, but so I knew that previous to that there was some danger in WP activity. But we were steeled after a while. When you become a main activist, in other words, you're prepared for anything. If you just arrived, then you receive your baptism of fire. But among myself and other brothers and sisters, we were the core activists who knew that we had to face serious repression. We didn't care so much in that sense, So we were steeled in that period. So we knew that we had to face some difficulty.
As a young member of the WP at the time, you made mention a few moments ago, at that time when Dr. Rodney was transported to Linden in disguise, it was in the midst of the civil rebellion.
Yes.
Being a young member of the WPA, what sort of activities were you personally involved in as part of the civil rebellion?
Arranging public meetings, announcing at public meetings, sharing Day Clean, the party newspaper, picketing.
Dr. Westmaas, could you just please repeat your list of activities, but Madam and other members of the Commission are making a note.
The duties included peaceful picketing, demonstrations, sharing the party newspaper, Day Clean, to individual houses and in the public domains, organizing public meetings, which includes sharing handbills and announcing at public meetings. At some point, I was one of the members of the party who was frequently announcing at public meetings, announcing the public meeting. So those are some of the activities. As I said before, I was also active in the party office. So I would be responsible for the distribution of papers and taking reports from activists who come off to the streets to report on any incidents they face, as well as other privations on their liberty. But it was a generalized situation. I was not involved at the executive level, just an ordinary member doing his work in relation to the struggle at that time.
I think the witness said that there were threats of thuggery to himself when he distributed papers.
Yeah.
What do you mean by threats of thuggery? I don't know.
Okay, it depends on which section of the city you are. If you go to, and I was part of a group called the Day Clean Brigade at one point, which means that you will be a group of activists who go to specific trouble areas to distribute Day Clean, which is the party newspaper. And when you arrive at those locations, usually in areas which traditionally enjoy the support of the ruling party, that if you went into that area, you would face more hostility than in areas which you considered liberated in a certain way. So, for example, I lived in Prashad Nagar, and I'm pretty sure I could distribute day clean in Prashad Nagar without any fear. But if I went with a group to, say, Victoria Village, at that time, you may, or Mocha, you may encounter hostility. So yeah, there's a threat, implicit threat.
So this was hostility from ordinary citizens who who had a different political
Yeah, different political
loyalty.
either organized or spontaneous.
Thank you.
You made reference to specific villages like Mocha, and what was the other one?
Victoria Village.
Victoria. Now, why would you have experienced hostility within these particular villages?
Well, it's not only those areas. I mean, Victoria Village, you know, it is, you can, the state felt that if you, the threat generally, but there are certain areas if you went to that, you know, they specifically thought it was territory which was now being engaged by the WPA, and thereby you needed to restrict or threaten access to that area. So there are some zones, for example, over time, in which we penetrated and managed to maintain a certain presence which was quote-unquote accepted by all parties. And there are other zones in which you went into with a knowledge that that area has not yet been quote-unquote liberated in a certain way in which the threat to your physical safety would be implicit, if not explicit. And so you could be attacked by citizens who said, WPA people are coming in here to make trouble, or something like that, along that line.
Why was it so important, either to the WPA or yourself being part of this day clean brigade, to get out the day clean even though there was physical threats and imminent threats in these particular areas?
Well, as I indicated, the Civil Rebellion, we knew that there were ups and downs in the Civil Rebellion, and we knew that if you tried to engage in certain parts of the country, that you would face certain kinds of responses from the state, and we knew that that was part of life. You can't determine it in any specific way because it was a spontaneous move-in situation. The Civil Rebellion was not up and down, and there were various types of activities the party did. I was more likely to be engaged in day clean distribution. That was my forte. But as I said, it would depend on where you go. I can't recall all the areas. Other activists face much more serious threats than I do. I mean, Brother Desmond Ali and the other members of the Day Clean Brigade, Osase and others would face serious problems in East Rhymeville, which is a ward of the city. They were arrested and charged and stuff like that. So there's a lot of activists who face far more harassment than I did personally, so it's a generalized situation, but I can't recall all the pieces of that repression in one stream. It's a single stream. I personally faced threats at Leguan when I went there to sell Day Clean one Christmas. We were chased from a particular zone, but we escaped without any problem. You make a judgment on the spot. But the entire Leguan was more receptive to us than that particular district or location, largely because the persons in that particular area were supporters of the People's National Congress at that time. So it's a very fluid situation, which is not necessarily hierarchical in a certain way.
Thank you, Dr. Westmaas. Were you ever arrested
Yes.
by the police?
Yes.
How many occasions were you arrested?
Not as many as Takuma Gunse, but I would suggest about 3 or 4 times. 3 or 4 times.
And what was the reason for your arrest?
Being in the wrong company. I mean, Dr. Rupnarayan, Walter Rodney. I was arrested at Line Part Center at the Stellion. I was arrested in New Amsterdam after doing at one point. I can't recall all the incidents. I was arrested in Camberville, I think, at one point. I was I was arrested another place. I think it was on the further up the East Coast. I can't recall the name of the village. We were put in a cell for the night. Again, a day clean situation or a public meeting situation. But I can, if you need, the day clean has reports of those incidents. but there were approximately 4 to 5 times I was arrested personally.
Were you ever charged and put before the court for any offenses?
No, I was jailed several times overnight before appearing in court, but never, and this was just for 2 or 3 days. I was never charged, no.
Never charged.
Did you say you were arrested because you were in bad company?
I meant it metaphorically. I meant my colleagues, Dr. Rupnine and Walter Rodney, if you're in that company, bad company for the opposite side. In other words, they were targets, and you might happen to be collateral damage.
So it was in the course of carrying out your party activities?
Yes, yeah. So if, I remember one instance myself, Brother UC Guyana, Dr. Rupnine, Chaiko Guyana, and others were distilling in New Amsterdam, and we were all arrested and taken because we were going up to open a WPA office in Berbice, and we were all arrested and put in prison for the period of time, at least.
But, you know, I would really like to know what reason was given when the persons were arrested, what was said to them by the police. And you said you were placed before the court but not charged, or you were never placed before the court?
Yeah, one occasion I went before the court too, but in those cases, the situation, there were so many incidences that some courts were reluctant to, the police brought you to the court, and depending on the magistrate, he or she would, you know, say this is flimsy situation, would release you on your own recognizance. Or in other cases, other activists would actually be charged, but Takuma again, Dr. Rupnarayan, Karen D'Souza and others would actually be charged. But I just went temporarily before a court and then released on your own recognizance.
So what were you told when you were arrested? Please try to take it one by one if you can remember at all. What reason did the police give? Because the police do have powers of arrest and detention in certain circumstances. So we need to assess what was said, what was the perception of the police when you were taken into custody and detained.
To be difficult to recall, the police sometimes acted on the orders of above, and they themselves did not know what they were charging you for or arresting you for. They were sometimes bewildered. Oh, we just have to take these WPA people to court. So I can't recall distinctly. I could find the records and substantiate some of my statements, but I can't, my memory is fuzzy about what they would say because, you know, it was so generalized and so uneven that you can't specific down to a specific time. That time was a different time than an ordinary society where you go before, you're told, you read your rights, like in the United States where you said you read your Miranda rights. In Guyana at that time, you're just picked up, hustled, and you're not given any formal declaration of intent sometimes, you know. So it's a different fluid situation at that time.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Westmaas, as part of this civil rebellion, were you ever aware of the WPA having an arm called the Security Committee?
Only subsequently. I mean, well after the death of Dr. Rodney, I learned of that.
And approximately how long after the death did you learn about that?
I can't recall. It would be later in late 1980 or 1981 or thereabouts, when I joined the executive committee. I would later, when we were being debriefed about, we were pursuing justice for Rodney at that time, and we were assembling documentation, and at that time you had to debrief activists who were not on the inside at that time about the situation. So at one of those meetings I was debriefed about the security committee.
About the Security Committee.
I'm very sorry, Counsel. I need to get back to these arrests, having regard to the terms of reference. I'm just curious. You gave us one instance. You were going to a meeting, I think?
It was the opening of the WPA office at Line Path, Berbice.
All right, that's one.
Yeah.
Can you remember or link any of your other detentions or arrests to any particular activity on behalf of the WPA? If you can't, fine.
Yeah, day clean distribution will be one. The distribution of the party newspaper. The party newspaper was seen as a very dangerous instrument of propaganda. And so if you had it in possession, you could be arrested and charged at that time.
So you recall being arrested while you were distributing Day Clean newspaper?
At least one time, yes.
At least one time. So that takes care of at least two. Can you recall any other specific occasions? Maybe, maybe not.
If I skirt through the Day Clean, I would recall, but there are other instances. But, and sometimes these arrests were just for temporary moment, or like a couple hours, and then you're released. It's not they weren't taken to court as such.
Thank you. I think you have been as helpful on that as you can be. Grateful.
The first incident was in Berbice, the first arrest.
No, I wouldn't say the first. I said one of the
Yes, one of them, yes.
Yeah.
Where was the location the second, remember?
Line Park, Skeldon, I think it was. But we were not there. We were trying to get access there on this ferry Stelling. And there it was, a set of us were arrested. I think Brother James Herod from Berbice was also in that group. About 10 to 11 people were arrested.
This Line Park is where?
Line Park is Skeldon and Berbice. We had a membership.
This is also a part of Berbice?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
A village or city.
That's enough. Well, thank you.
Dr. Westmaas, my last question to you is in relation to your knowledge of the Security Committee. Between 1978 and 1980, were you ever privy to any sort of plan of the WPA to overthrow the government?
No, the only quote-unquote plan was the organized resistance in which I was part of in terms of distributing papers, attending public meetings, getting the word out, trying to unite people and civilians and political parties to focus on the need for democratic change, but not in terms of any cell as such.
Do you know a gentleman by the name of Alan Robert Gates or Clive de Nobrega?
Yes.
And how do you know this person?
I would see this person contiguous or close to Dr. Rupnarine for a particular period of time, or in the presence of Dr. Rupnarine.
And what period of time would you have seen him present along with Dr. Rupnarine?
An extended period. It was a difficult, I can't recall all I just knew that when we attended public meetings or public gatherings, or Dr. Rupnarine was traveling, that Clive de Nobrega, as I think I knew him at that time, or Gates would be in his presence.
Would this be between 1978 and 1980 that you would have observed him being present?
I think it would be a bit later than that. Certainly not 78, certainly not 79, to be 1980. And I think beyond 1980, but not 78 or 79.
If you were to see Alan Robert Gates or Clive de Nobrega again, would you be able to identify him?
Yes, I would.
Just for the record, do you see him in this room?
Yes, he's a blue shirt at the back.
May the record just reflect, perhaps the gentleman in the blue shirt can stand? Could the gentleman in the blue shirt at the back stand? Is that him you're referring to? As Clive de Nobrega?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Grateful. Have a seat.
Mr. Chairman, on this point, is that why Mr. Gates is still here, having given evidence already? So that he could be identified by every witness for the WPA?
I don't know that he's been identified by any witness, by any other witness.
No, but the question is, why is he still here? He has testified.
I wouldn't know that. I wouldn't know that. You may well ask where others here. I don't know that.
This is an unusual thing because we have witnesses in here every day before they testify. And we now have a witness who has testified but is still here.
But there are others
When
who-
he's supposed to be in prison, and he
Oh,
said there's no deal. We're going to address you on the Prison Act.
I can answer
proper
some
time.
of those concerns if I'm allowed. Originally, when the warrant was issued to secure the attendance of Mr. Gates, we were unsure exactly as to when he will be given the evidence. So in a blanket fashion, the warrant included all the dates. So I believe his presence here is more because the prison authority doesn't want to take it on themselves to disobey the warrant issued by this commission. So unless we find a way to alter that warrant that was already issued, I think that the prison authority is duty-bound to bring him.
I'm not going to deal with that now, Mr. Chairman, with respect. There's a specific provision which deals with prisoners coming out of the prison for inquiries. And we're going to address you on that at a subsequent time.
Mr. Williams, there have been some, I recall, some concerns about the activities of Mr. Alan Robert Gates during the time. So I think it is useful that this, fortuitous maybe, that this witness was able to identify him and speak about him this morning.
I don't think anyone has questioned that Mr. Gates was not the bodyguard for the period of Mr. Roopner, right? I don't think anyone who has cross-examined Mr. Gates has attempted to say that he wasn't the bodyguard during that period. So that's an uncontroverted fact.
People cross-examine different
You know.
Please proceed, please.
Grateful. Dr. Westmaas, a little earlier in your evidence, you made reference to the recognition handbook.
Yes.
Could you explain what the recognition handbook is?
In my original contact with the recognition handbook, it is a gray covered text with a number of names of individuals primarily, if not totally, associated with the Working People's Alliance. And it has a foreword which says that these notes are provided for easy recognition of WPA activists at that time, and their supporters.
When was the first time you saw the recognition handbook?
I saw the recognition handbook sometime in early 1980 or late 1970, I can't recall. Dr. Rodney, I was entering the WPA office, and Dr. Rodney called me behind the counter, and he took out a booklet and showed it to me. And he said, you know, he was kind of half smile, he said, look through it. So I proceeded to turn it, and I said, what's this about? And he said, keep turning. And so when I reached the last page, my note on my presence in that book was noted, and he smiled and took it back. So in other words, he's alerting me to the fact that I was part of this text. Presumably, he was doing that to other activists, but he had access to it somehow, and he was showing it to me when I came into the WPA office. That was my first sight of the document. Later on, it was part of the everyday documentation in the WPA office, which I had access to.
Dr. Westmaas, if you were to see a copy of the recognition handbook for the Working People's Alliance, would you be able to recognize it?
Yes, I would.
My application, Mr. Chairman, would be to show TO2, which has already been tendered to the witness.
Right ahead, please.
Yes.
That is a copy of the recognition
Yes.
handbook you spoke about?
A photocopy, yes.
A photocopy. Could you show us the picture of yourself and your information? What page number are you on?
I'm page 41.
Page 4-1.
Yeah.
Nigel Westmaas. That is your picture and that is your information?
Yes, a picture with when I had hair, yes.
Now, and the information stated there about you was accurate?
Mostly, yes.
But does your inclusion there not suggest that you were more active than you thought you were?
Pardon? Sorry.
Your inclusion there, what does that suggest? That you were recognized by...
Oh, yes, yeah. I was surprised. I think Rodney showed me it in that context too. Page 41. That, you know, that here you're doing work for the party, but you know, you're being watched as well. And you're part of a document which is primarily designed to watch us, collective in the party.
I'm glad the witness added that, because until then I wasn't sure if it was a booklet produced by the WPA, noting its members, or produced by other outside organizations targeting the WPA.
No, it was, at the time, my encounter with Dr. Rodney in relation to the text, and subsequently, which was viewed as a document which was emanated from the state, designed to process the membership and the supporters of the Working People's Alliance at that time. And I associated as such from that moment to this moment.
Dr. Westmaas, when you first went through this document, you looked at every single page of the document?
Yes, I did.
When you first went through the document, did you see a picture of Dr. Rodney in this recognition handbook?
Yes, I did.
Are you in a position to tell the members of the commission why this document now does not have a picture of Dr. Rodney in it?
Because after the death of Dr. Rodney, the WPA was organizing a public image in his light for people to remember the memorial service as well as the public memorials after his death. And Brian Rodway, who is a WPA artist and member, who was subsequently deceased, we had to take it out. In those days, we had no access to photocopiers in the form we have now. So to stencil that image of Dr. Rodney, we required it to be removed physically from the text. So that image was removed from our copy of that booklet and placed on a stencil and blown up because it had his hands raised in protest. So it was a significant artistic production after that. And that is why it is not present in the text.
Do you have in your possession the original recognition handbook of the Working People's Alliance?
No, it has disappeared. I took a photocopy, and luckily I did so because records in Guyana generally tend to disappear very quickly.
And the photocopy you took did not have the picture of Dr. Rodney in
No,
it?
no, that was years after. We didn't have it, no.
Dr. Westmaas, in your statement, there are several appendices attached. I wish to direct you to Appendix 3. It begins at page 14.
Yes.
In here, you have general repression against the WPA, our country, from 1974 to 1980.
Yes.
And I would just wish to direct you to page 19, under the heading 1979.
Yes.
And you have there WPA Recognition Handbook appears sometime in 1979 to 1988.
No, that is an incorrect, that's my typo, to read 1980.
But definitely before Rodney's assassination.
Yes.
Okay. Now, this entire Appendix 3, which speaks to the general repression against the WPA, or the country, from 1974 to 1980, who prepared this appendix?
I prepared it.
When did you do so?
2 months ago, prior to preparation for the statement for the commission.
And you,
Council, I was of the view that that was not prepared by the WPA.
no, I'm talking about the appendix, sir. Appendix number 3, page 14 of the witness's statement.
But the handbook, for the purposes of the record, let's have that.
Yes.
Who prepared the
Who
handbook?
prepared the handbook?
We always assumed it was the state, some aspect of the state machinery, intelligence services, or we never had any direct corroboration of exactly which state agency did it, but generally speaking, we always considered it to be a recognition handbook used by elements of the police force at that time to recognize party members.
You were never able to confirm that.
Pardon?
Were you ever able to confirm that?
No.
Dr. Westmaas, my question was in relation to the appendix number 3, which is some sort of a timeline
Yes,
traversing the years 1974 to 1980.
yes,
And you indicated you prepared this timeline
yes,
of events
Yeah.
between 1974 to 1980,
yes,
and you did so 2 months ago,
approximately.
approximately. What did you use in order to compile the information in this timeline?
A number of documents in my possession, WPA's Day Clean, the Catholic Standard in my possession, the book published by Father Andrew Morrison called Justice, and a few newspaper reports from the Guyana Chronicle and other newspapers around that period, but more on the side of the Day Clean and the Catholic Standard. More of the material was culled from those two sources.
Dr. Westmaas, I wish to direct you now to pages 18 and 19 of the same Appendix 3.
Yes,
You have listed under the heading 1978 several events which would have occurred during that period, 1978.
yes.
Now, how many of the instances listed here were you personally present at?
I was present at the Parliament when, in May 1978, but again, my memory is very fuzzy about the events then. I just knew I was present. It was covering the entire, traversing from, Stabroek Market area all the way to where the courts are now, and I was probably in one of those groups, so I didn't see the actual incident of Martin Carter being beaten, but I knew I was in the vicinity.
Were you present on any other incident occurring in 1978 that is recorded here?
I was present with I visited several polling stations in the referendum boycott day, so I knew that there was people moving around in vehicles to check the status of people voting or not voting, and so I could recall going to a few polling stations at that time, but those are the only two incidents.
To go back to May 17, did you attend the public rally afterwards? Do you recall?
Public rally afterwards. Where's that stated? Oh, yes, the Committee in Defense of Democracy.
Yeah,
Yes, I probably attended that because there are very few public events at that time when leading WP members would not attend. So if it was a vast meeting of the Committee in Defense of Democracy, it meant that WPA was involved, and it meant that most of the senior activists would be present. I wasn't a senior activist then, but I was a participant in that rally.
Thank you.
These meetings, May 17th with sticks.
Again, it's not, we only assume it was a combination of members of the House of Israel and maybe elements from the state at the time. We couldn't determine exactly. The word used, the collateral word we used at that time was thugs, and you didn't sometimes differentiate between agencies who comprised thuggery at that time. You could just assume. Some of our members began to recognize some of them, so you would hear from time to time somebody identifying one of them or two of them in the group. But generally speaking, you can't determine the agency from which they emanated because it was a very, as I said, very fluid situation.
They're dressed in any particular way, distinctive?
No,
Consistent?
Ordinary, except in some cases when the House of Israel turned up at the court, which was mentioned already in the testimony, there was mostly civilian clothes.
Could you continue on page 90, where you highlight some incidents occurring in the year 1979?
Yeah.
I was directing you earlier because you listed the recognition handbook as being aware of that in 1979, and you corrected it to 1980.
Yeah.
Now, could you go through the list and just indicate which of these incidents highlighted during the year 1979 you were personally present at?
Well, not all of them are incidents. Some of them are searches and the formation of groups. So I wouldn't have been present at the formation of a group, but in this, I was outside, in July 14, I was outside the magistrate's court in the event which resulted in the death of Father Dar. But I was not present at any other activity here, and some of the activities are just in the form of a alert or in the form of searches, which I wouldn't be present at. I was not part of the patrons who were searching the Metropole Cinema, for instance. I was not there. So,
You were not there.
yeah.
And you got the information about these activities from where?
I call them from a combination of Day Clean and the Catholic Standard and the booklet Justice by Father Andrew Morrison, and maybe one or two reports from the Guyana Human Rights Association.
In relation to Father Dark's death, did you actually observe any attack on him or any circumstances?
No.
You did not
No.
personally observe?
I was moving back and forth. I was, in charge of the party office, so I did arrive on the scene, but I can't recall the details. I heard that he was killed subsequent to his death, after his death.
May I just, Professor, you used the word propaganda earlier, and you said you used as the source documents the Catholic Standard and Day Clean. Those publications, did they report the news in an unbiased, objective way, or were they propagating some kind of angle in order to put pressure on the government?
Well, the Catholic Standard was a bona fide newspaper in the classic sense of the term. Day Clean was partially legal at that time, or mostly legal, and it was just one sheet of paper. It was just one back and forth, so it couldn't report on every event. And secondly, obviously to report on events that happened to affect the WPA at that time. But we wouldn't have had any more, we wouldn't have substantial information to put in one-page document. The Catholic Standard was helpful in the sense that it reported generally from its own position, acting in a certain way as a human rights monitor. So it reported very substantially on any event that occurred in that period. So if you wanted them a source of a quote-unquote objective analysis, you could probably go to the Catholic Standard, right? But of course, the state didn't consider it such. They considered it anti-government at that time.
Thank you.
At page 18, you're dealing with Wednesday, May the 17th, and you're dealing with a public rally of the
Yeah.
Committee in Defense of Democracy.
Yes.
They broke it up with sticks and noise. Who is they?
Well, this was a quote from Day Clean of April 1978. So they would presumably refer to supporters of the ruling party at the time.
After dancing and shouting burning fever, what is that?
Well, that, as I said, would usually be related to activists of the ruling party at the time making their presence felt.
So, but what words would you use that you're calling here burning fever?
What words would we have been using, or they? They would be shouting, "We have fever, Burnham fever," In other words, as a response to their support for the Prime Minister and the government of the time. And it was a general quote sometimes used in their rallies to whip up their crowds. They would use the term Burnham fever. So there's a reference to that. I have no part in configuring it.
I would like you to clarify something for me.
Yes.
You say this event occurred on the 17th of May, but it is reported in Day Clean in April. Could you explain that?
No, there's a particular section of the quote which is quoted from the Clean. The bottom part, the top part is reference to the rally itself in defense of democracy. So that's an error there.
So the Day Clean, could you explain more fully? The reference to Day Clean, Volume 2, Number 35, April 1978,
Yes.
is really just a quotation that you
Yes.
have given.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you have as having occurred on May 17, what is your source? You're being present at the meeting, as you said, or some other source?
No, this is a combination of quotations from the actual Day Cleans and Catholic standards of the time and my summary of the main events.
Okay, so this would have been from a newspaper of a later time,
Yes.
later than
Yes.
April
Yes.
1978.
Yes.
And having regard to, I believe, the fourth or fifth term of reference, the fourth, you have particularly noted that about 16 persons were beaten, mainly Indians. What is the significance of that?
Well, this again is a direct quote. It's not my insertion.
But you were around in that time. Why would it have been relevant to name the ethnicity of the persons?
Oh, well, yes. In the context of, as I said, I attached to this, this document I prepared a seminal article by Brother U.C. Guyana called Racial Insecurity in the Political System. Because if you're living in Guyana at that particular time, as now, the undercurrents of race and racial insecurity were present, and the identification and location of individuals who attended meetings could be ascribed to a particular political party or a particular support group. So if this report suggests that Indians were beaten, then it would suggest that there was a ethnic input into the attack on that particular group of people. In other words, they were seen as the other in relation to the struggle at the time.
The other, please be specific.
Yes, okay.
Speak with directly.
Yes, well,
34 years after.
34 years after, the ethnic situation in Guyana remains the same. Indians and Africans have historically had politically volatile relations, especially at elections. This, Brother Guyana refers to from the 1957 period, and I could extend it to the current time. So if a group of people were attacked directly in that period, and they were mainly Indian, then it would suggest that there was a racial or ethnic impulse to attack those types of people because they belonged to citizens who did not ascribe to the policies or behavior of the People's National Congress at the time.
Dr. Westmaas, just as we're on point and the question was asked about the Catholic standard and versus, well, the Day Clean, you had submitted to the commission an article from the Catholic standard dated the 16th of September 1979. You recall that?
Yes,
And this article was discussing the Vreeden Hoop incident.
yes.
My respectful application would be to have a copy of this article shown. Yeah. I believe copies were distributed this morning.
I see it.
It was distributed this morning. Standard. More PNC violence at WPA meeting is the heading. That is a copy of the article you submitted to
Yes.
the commission. My respectful application at this time would be to have the article tendered and marked as an exhibit, suggested tag NW2.
The document is so received and so tagged.
And this is the coverage that the Catholic Standard had given to the incident
Yes.
occurring at Reading, which you spoke about.
Yes.
This is September 16, 79.
Correct. You also submitted to the commission an article from the Sunday Stabroek News dated June the 24th, 2007, which is a short history of the day clean. If
Yes.
you were to see a copy of that article, you would be able to recognize it.
Yes, I would.
My application is to have a copy of this article shown. That is a copy of the article detailing a history of the day clean.
Well, not detailing, but giving a short history of the day clean, yes.
And the day clean was in fact the WPA newsletter
Yes.
at the time.
New sheet, yeah.
I wonder if the print couldn't be made any finer. Yes.
My respectful application to have this document tendered and marked NW3.
Receive and so marked.
Mr. Westmaas, you also submitted, and this is just for the matter of the record, 2 other documents to the commission.
Yes.
One is a statement by Dr. Walter Rodney.
Yes.
Where did you get this statement from?
It was a statement done and handed out at the time. I can't recall where it came from. It was in WP archives. It was a statement made on a single sheet of paper, but published by Dr. Rodney. I can't corroborate it was published by any other agency, news agency, but it was certainly circulated at the time as a reason for his leave, is not being able to teach at the University of Guyana.
This is dated the 18th of September 1974. 74 Georgetown, Guyana. Respectfully ask that the document be shown.
Yes.
That is a statement that was written by Dr.
Dr. Rodney and handed out, I don't remember, it was a press conference, but because I wasn't around at that time, but it was subsequently in the WP archives and it was a known document. It was used at various times. A statement he made about his situation in regard to the University of Guyana.
And from your interactions, both with Dr. Rodney and your involvement with the WPA between 1978 and 1980, is that document, that statement, one which Dr. Rodney actually told you or the members that that is his position
No,
on
he did.
his employment?
He didn't tell me. I didn't have any conversation with him on this, but this is a document reflecting his position at that time.
At that
it was,
time.
It was a public statement handed out at a press conference, but again, it has no citation of the exact publication as such.
Would respectfully ask that this document be tendered and marked as an exhibit, suggested NW4 tag.
Yes, but you know, where are we going? Mr. Westmaas, Dr. Westmaas, is not owning it, the document, from any personal basis. So where are we going with it?
Councillor, are you objecting to it being tendered?
Well, we haven't heard of it before. I mean, Mr. PNC Guyana gave evidence on this in his school for 3 days. In chief, He never referred to it. This is a plain document.
At this time, I would respectfully rely on the witnesses' viva voce evidence that through the years, he has been the one who has been given the unofficial title of archivist and has been collected several writings from the WPA over time, and I would rely on that as the basis to have this document tendered.
Well, all I'm saying is that the witness has not in any manner affirmed personal knowledge of this document. He says he thinks it could have been handed out at a press conference, but it's a bald document.
Counsel, do you have a note of exactly what the witness said? Do any of you have a note of exactly what the witness said in relation to this document?
Yes, please.
Perhaps you should check it.
Madam, might I please ask the witness again in relation to this particular document?
My note is that the witness said it was a statement made by Rodney before his time, but it was in the archives of the WPA, and he went on to say, and it was certainly common knowledge something. I didn't get the rest. That's why I was trying to get your assistance.
I can elicit that again from him, please, you madam. Unfortunately, I do not have a note of that continuation. Dr. Westmaas?
Yes.
You had stated earlier that it was part of the WPA archives.
Yes.
And it was known, and Madam did not get the ending of what you were saying.
Yeah.
Would you at this time clarify what you were saying? It was known as what?
Yeah, it was a document produced by Dr. Rodney in or around 1974. The date is given on it, September 1974. It was in the WPA archives, and I thought because of the discussion previous to this, my testimony, that the Dr. Rodney incident came up, that I would tender it to the commission. It was not published in any public official media. It was a statement made and circulated by Dr. Rodney, possibly to the press at that time. But I have no further knowledge about its status, except that I know from the contents that it does belong to Dr. Rodney.
In light of that, my application remains the same to have the document.
What application remains the same? What document is it reproduced in that is officially WPA? Is it in the Day Clean? Is it in the Carthage Standard? Is it in the national newspapers? So what are we going to do? Just come and bring any scrap paper in here and say it's in the archives? The witness is showing great uncertainty about this document. And I don't know what this archives is. Was it a national archive? Is some private archive? What is it? How do you establish it?
Is there evidence that it was authored by Rodney?
I believe the witness said that it was distributed by Dr. Rodney at a press conference.
As his document?
As his document.
He did not. He said it was handed out at a press conference. We don't know which press conference is it. That's why we've had documents laid over here by the WPA. This document was not in it. A ream of documents. So we come now with a document that is bald. The witness is unsure about it.
Members of the commission, if I may, I do not believe the witness is unsure about it. The witness is saying he got it from the WPA archives. And it is a document that he recognized to be the position of Dr. Rodney that was shared out at a press conference.
But it is headed statement by Dr. Walter Rodney.
Chair, respectfully, I think that the witness needs to indicate whether he is aware that Walter Rodney accepted this document as something that he had authored, and whether it was published on that basis and he understood that to be the basis. That's all. Either he knows that or he don't know that, and we move.
Dr. Westmaas, do you know this document, which is headed Statement of Dr. Walter Rodney, to be made by Dr. Rodney? And
I know it to be made by Dr. Rodney, but as Counsel Williams indicated, it is not formally published in any newspaper or official document that I know of at present. It may have been referred to in the Caribbean Contact at the time, but as I said before, it was a statement usually in that period of time people would make statements and not, put official document in it. It was totally a press conference. I don't have any other information other than that.
But the body of it would suggest that it was written by him, and the statement that I have says statement by Dr. Walter Rodney. We'll receive it and give it whatever weight we regard as appropriate.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, but I could bring a document like this tomorrow. Statement by Dr. Walter Rodney. Anybody could bring a statement like this.
Yeah, but that's not the reality that we have here, that anybody could do anything.
No, but the reality is, I respect Dr. Westmaas and his skill, and he hasn't given us any assurance that he could vouch for the document. Other than saying something that it could have been in the archives, don't forget we have been given documents from the WPA as part of their publications. I don't think I contested any of them. All you have here is something printed that anybody else could have done it. I mean,
well, we will
why was
examine
it
it in the
made over
context
before?
of the evidence and all the other documents and determine what weight, if any, we will give it.
I'm guided, Mr. Chairman.
I don't think we should be delayed on that issue.
I'm guided.
Grateful. Dr. Westmaas, you continued in Appendix 3 to detail some events in the year 1980, and this begins at page 21.
Yes.
Between January to June, were you present at any of the events that you listed here?
No, as I said, it's a combination of factual incidents, which does not mean that means that my presence would be necessary in any form. For example, WPA members arrested for selling day cleans on their home search in Bartica. I would not have been present there. And the others are reports of police arrest of Dr. David Hines of Timeri and WPA activist Nazir Khan of Lagrange. But I wouldn't be present at an event which is apart from my experience.
I wish to direct you to, I think it's the third paragraph of the heading, under the heading 1980, and on page 21, where it says, some weeks ago, Police Commissioner Barker made a statement. He said that if some people choose to establish their headquarters in Tiger Bay, we have a special squad to deal with that area. And this you referenced from the Day Clean, Volume 4, Number 2, January 25th, 1980.
Yes.
What do you understand this statement to be referring to? Whose headquarters established in Tiger Bay?
That would have been the Working People's Alliance headquarters.
And what would have been the reference to the special squad to deal with that area? Are you aware of there being a special squad?
I was aware of this special squad, but I don't, in the context of his statement, I wouldn't know what he was referring to. We knew of a special squad, what we call the Death Squad, which was assigned to restrict not only WPA but other activists in the country. But in his specific statement, he refers to a special squad, which I may not have any prior knowledge of.
Before you proceed, you said WPA activists and other activists in the country. Who are the other activists that you are referring to?
Well, as you see from the testimony, from time to time, PVP activists would be every now and then arrested and charged along the same lines as the WPA. And activists or supporters of the Catholic Church and other organizations, the Anglican Church, may also have been harassed at that time. So it was a general statement referring to members outside of the WPA who could also be subject to harassment.
This is the first time I'm hearing about the Anglican Church. Not wanting to usurp your position, Council, but tell me about that. It's the first I've heard it mentioned in the...
Well, I mean, I don't have any specific incident, but the Committee for Defense of Democracy was established prior to the referendum in 1978, and subsequent organizations which came together as a collective to speak to and refer to and to complain about human rights violations would include members of the Catholic Church, members of the Anglican Church, business strata, and other interested parties. So there was several groups like that. The Committee in Defense of Democracy was one, Compass was another one, which included people from the church and the private sector who, along with WPA and the People's Progressive Party, would protest incidents in the country. And from time to time, you would get reports of church members so being harassed as well.
And did this group, Committee for the Defense of Democracy, continue into 1978, 79?
Yes, approximately, yes. There's no defining moment when it disappeared or when it, I knew it was formed around March 1978 or thereabouts.
March 1978? You said
Approximately.
74 earlier. Committee for the Defense of Democracy.
Yes, Committee for Defense of Democracy, yes.
That was formed.
That was designed mainly to deal with the impending referendum.
That was 1978.
Yes,
You had
yes,
said,
yes.
I heard 74. I must
Yeah.
have misheard.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Put in context for me, Tiger Bay.
Grateful, sir.
We've had Linden as an old PNC stronghold.
Yeah.
Well, what is the significance of Tiger Bay?
I'd be grateful, sir. Dr. Westmaas, the reference to the area Tiger Bay, first and foremost, just indicate which part of Guyana Tiger Bay is located.
Tiger Bay is located in Georgetown, Guyana. It's between Water Street and Main Street in a certain ward of the city. Approximately we're a little further north of where Guyana Stores is. But historically it was a depressed area where working class people usually lived. Those working class people would usually worked in the bond area, that is the shipping area, and mostly it was a poor and depressed area. At the time of the formation of the WPA, there were several constituent organizations which worked in that area. One of them was called MAO, the Movement Against Oppression. This group included people who would later become members of the WPA, and they worked in solidarity, including Brian Rodway and others, included solidarity with the poor people of that particular zone. And in the course of 1972, a young man was shot called Caesar. I forgot his first name. And his shooting galvanized Mao and other groups to protest the treatment by the police of usually young black males in that particular part of the city, a trend which continues to this day. And so the Mao was formed to represent Caesar, I think it was Keith Caesar, and that symbolized the nature of that particular zone. So it was out of that that WPA became interested in locating its headquarters in a depressed part of the city, largely around the vision of UC Guyana and Dr. Walter Rodney, because Rodney had his own historical linkage with poor people in Jamaica and elsewhere, where he went, we called it the dongles in Jamaica, the poor people. He was one of the first faculty members in Mona campus, other than Dr. Rex Nettleford, to go directly to meet the Rastafari. And as that symbolism, I think, was brought into the modern period when the WPA was formed, that we must locate ourselves among the poor and the oppressed and the powerless. And so it's out of that the word Tiger Bay became synonymous with poor and synonymous with crime and synonymous with WPA when WPA had its center there.
Tell me, what do you make of that statement there attributed to the Commissioner of Police, Barker? If some people choose to establish their headquarters in Tiger Bay, we have a special squad to deal with that area.
Well, again, associated with the nature of the area, the tone of that suggests that why would a political party put its place in what they would call, the police would call a lumpen area at that time. Lumpen proletariat is a term often used. Why would a political party go there except if it is not to associate with disturbance. Disturbance of two kinds. One, political, and secondly, crime. And so it was in that context I think he made that statement.
Yeah, but speak to me directly and speak to all of us. What do you mean by political disturbance? Putting up a headquarters there would create political disturbance?
Well, because, again, the antecedent was the Caesar incident. When the Caesar incident occurred, a number of groups went into Tiger Bay to give solidarity to the residents of that area to protest the shooting of this unarmed youth who was caught in a bond, and shot by the police. So the general conception of the police for that area was usually one of a crime-ridden area. And so the political variant of that came out when the WPA sought to choose its headquarters there. So you had that mix of the political and the social coming together. And hence the term choose to establish your headquarters in Tiger Bay. It's not the contempt for that area is implicit in the statement, in his statement.
But who the contempt for the WPA? Is that implicit?
Contempt for both the WPA and the quote-unquote lumpen population of that particular vicinity of the city.
Very well.
WPA was establishing groundings with the people in that area.
Yes, groundings is a term used. Groundings is in Jamaica, groundings is in Guyana.
You seem to have forgotten, huh?
Pardon?
You seem to have forgotten the language of the time.
No, I'm still grounded.
Mr. Chairman, the page 11 of the witness's statement, the appendix 1, refers to the name of Keith Caesar at 1972. Page 11.
Keith Caesar.
And the shooting at Tiger Bay.
Yeah.
Page 11 of his statement, which is appendix 1.
Did you ever Keith Caesar shooting Tiger Bay?
Yes.
October 27th?
Yes. 1972.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know, the lumping referred to by Dr. Westmaas, that you mean lumping as meaning lumping proletariat?
Yeah, it's not a negative term insofar as Marxist conceptions are. It's used, lumping is just used as an area where, as Madam Commissioner mentioned, groundings in the concept of Jamaica. When Rodney came across, he assumed that that's a revolutionary part of humanity, not to be discredited. So it's in that context it's used as a lumping proletariat, but it's not negative insofar as we are concerned. Insofar as Mr. Barker is concerned, it was a bad area for a political party to locate itself.
But who would have made that judgment, the police or the political party?
What judgment? The judgment?
As to whether it's a good place for them to locate or bad?
From our perspective or the perspective of the police?
What was your perspective, WPA?
Oh, our perspective was we were happy to be located there at the time. It was the general trend. We got to such an association that nobody troubled us in that area, quote unquote. There was a period where you could be robbed if you walked through at certain points, but WPA members were kind of immune to that because of our solidarity with and location in that area. Although some of the residents resented our presence there because more police attention was brought to the area. And so that was a double whammy, so to speak. But certainly our conception of going there directly was to locate ourselves with the poor and the powerless insofar as the groundings was concerned.
Well, we understand all of that, but I didn't understand why the Commissioner of Police should determine whether it's a good or bad area.
Well, it's a conception that is still present among, the conception of the areas where the poor live. Is generally, it's a historical pattern of people having contempt for poor areas where there's crime and criminality, as well as bad social conditions. So it's not surprising that Mr. Barker would make that comment in the context of that time, insofar as the order, that is the poor and the powerless, were located.
You sure that's the proper interpretation?
I'm only assuming it. No, I'm giving an interpretation.
Right.
Chair, I don't know if it brings to mind what your Jamaican colleague would remember as, can anything good come out of Trenchtown? As Bob Marley would have intoned.
Well, I don't think that is the appropriate interpretation, but I'm happy to hear that. We can go ahead.
So I'll give you the appropriate one when my turn comes. Why Mr. Barker said that?
Well, we look forward to that, sir. If this is a convenient point to break, I'll be happy to do so. How long do you think it should be?
20 minutes?
All right, 25 minutes, 25 minutes. 25 minutes. So we come back just about five minutes to